Hello, folks, and welcome back to the program. This is Chris live in Central Pennsylvania for a special interview today. A guest who we've had on the program before, Theo Jager, we're getting from SAAI in Southern Africa. We're going to talk about this foot and mouth crisis in South Africa as a way of reminding folks back in May when ranchers and farmers knew about this problem beginning to reemerge again in South Africa. And of course, I'm in contact with people in the farming community. People reached out to me and said, hey, Chris, this is becoming an issue. So I reached out to the Minister of Agriculture, John Steenhuisen, through his personal assistant and asked for an interview in late May. And I was told that I would be able to get him on Monday, if I recall correctly, anyway, a couple of days later. And then that day came and went and he didn't appear. And I said, hey, is he coming on? And she said, no, he's got something else going on. And I said, okay, I understand. Events unfolded over the weekend because some things had happened over the weekend. It's fair. And she said, we'll get him on in a few days. Well, then no response the second time. And then the third time, we're already in the first week of June. And then I just got no response. So the Minister of Agriculture had an opportunity to go on air and discuss this and tell people about it because South Africa's media covered the story briefly, but didn't really seem interested in probing into why it was a problem, what was going to happen, what the plan was to address this. So 3 times told I would get the Minister of Agriculture to come on and give people a chance to find out about it, and we could discover what the plan was. And we're talking about, 7 months ago or something like that. So here we are now in December of 2025, and it's a full-blown crisis, particularly in KZN and Limpopo, if I'm not mistaken. So we've got Theo Jager on here to talk a little bit about it. He's very close to the issue. He knows the situation with the vaccines that aren't produced in South Africa any longer, and the reliance on Botswana, and all the other mess that's here. Theo, what's the word? How are you doing today?
I'm fine, thank you, and thank you so much for inviting me onto your platform again, Chris. The last time we saw each other was in a coffee shop here in Pretoria, and we barely had time to talk. With all the people recognizing you and coming over to greet you, it's great to be on your platform again.
Well, Theo, that's true. There were several people that came over and recognized me, but a couple of those people recognized you too. I was like, I was almost embarrassed because people kept coming over, and I almost started to rise to welcome one guy, but he came over to say hello to you, not to me. All right, so this foot and mouth situation, this is not new, and the approach, in my view, was not the right approach. I understand probably why they've done it. We heard Minister Steenhuisen defend his response to it on Biz News a couple of days ago, in which he said that, well, this is how we've dealt with it in the past, and I'm going to believe the reason they did with that way in the past is maybe it worked, but they had better policing and better control and better measures to stop movement of livestock, but also it cost a lot of money to vaccinate all these this 14 million herd if you do them all. But the point is that now they've taken a whole new approach, but it took them 8 months to get there. Have I missed something in this story?
Chris, I'm going to try to unpack it for you in simple farmers' language. We will never be rid of foot and mouth disease in South Africa because we have buffalo. Where you have buffalo, it's endemic, especially in the district where I farm up north in the Letaba district, where we also have the Kruger National Park, and then all along our borders with Zimbabwe, with Botswana, and with Mozambique. And we have managed it for decades by trying to protect the integrity of zones. There's the red zone where it is endemic, the whole of the Kruger Park and all along the borders. And then there's a observation zone, we call it the blue zone, where we do not vaccinate and we pick it up as soon as it spills over into that zone so that we can then protect that one, make sure we hit it very hard with vaccinations in that area and push it back. And then the rest of the country, the white zone, is guaranteed foot-mouth free. But we did it with closing down that whole district. We had roadblocks. And as farmers, we also did some time on those roadblocks, both as members of the Farmers Association and in former times as members of the Commando. And we worked on those roadblocks alongside with the police, with the Defence Force, with the local traffic officials. And we never had problems in the white zone. It is only recently, while there is no one to take, and you'll understand the military term, command and control. There's no one to take command and control. and bring these various departments, these various authorities together and make sure that the integrity of those lines, those zones are protected. Hence, when we picked up this latest outbreak more than a year ago, in November 2024, we went to the department and we said to them, there's the data. Clearly, there's something wrong in northern KZN. And they knew about it. It was not news to them. But they did not comply to the regulations which demanded from the state, from the Department of Agriculture, the Division for Veterinary Services, to, one, declare a DMA, a disease management area, meaning that we close down that area. Neither did they ensure that there are vaccines in that area to address the problem with the affected animals. That only happened 4 months later. It is as good as me noting that there is a fire in my plantations and refusing to send the water there for a few months. So it ran out of control. It ran into a number of provinces, Northwest, Free State, Eastern Cape, places where we've never seen it before. And only now, about 2 weeks ago, at a farmers' conference, Minister Steenhuisen announced that we will take the drastic step to vaccinate the whole national herd. Now that is something drastic, but this is what it will take to address the problem. What he did not say is how this will be done, because it's not just starting to vaccinate now. We don't have the vaccines to vaccinate the whole herd. Even if we do our level best to import it, there's no one that can provide 14 million doses in the next few months. When we receive it, we need to treat it in a prescribed way. You don't just load it onto the back of a pickup and drive with it all over the country. You have to treat it in a certain way to make sure that it doesn't spill. And then who will vaccinate the animals? In our regulations, only the state veterinarians are allowed to do so. We want them to lift that restriction so that we can vaccinate it ourselves as farmers. We do it with lumpy skin disease. We do it with brucellosis. We are being trusted to do that. We want to hear the minister coming up with a practical plan to say, by this time we will do this. This is how we will do it. And then the farmers, at least, and the veterinarians are ready to do our part. But our problem is in the department itself, the Department of Agriculture. There are senior officials in that department who stand in the way of beating this disease. And to be quite frank, I don't see us winning this war against foot and mouth without a few of the heads rolling in that department.
Well, Theo, I used to live in Southern Africa, of course, Botswana, and I'm very familiar with foot and mouth disease. When I said that foot and mouth disease is endemic in Southern Africa, I was called a liar by at least one politician in South Africa. And the media reported, they didn't address me by name, but they said people are falsely stating that it's endemic, when in fact it is endemic. As you mentioned, buffalo have it. I know that in Botswana, when I lived there, that there was a lot of cattle rustling from Zimbabwe. But of course, it's the times when people were starving because of ZANU-PF's farm confiscation and their idiotic policies of dividing farms up in little blocks where people didn't have access to water or to roads to get their stuff in and out. So people are starving in Zimbabwe at the time, and if it hadn't been from the American government sending food aid, they would be millions of dead now. But that's not the point. The point is that there was a lot of cattle rustling, and every time that the rustlers got across the border in eastern Botswana and they managed to steal people's cattle, if the cattle reached the border, the Botswana Police Service would cordon it off, would not let the cattle come back. So they were considered lost. The government of Botswana would reimburse the cattle ranchers their money for the livestock because of the concern, because Botswana relies heavily I don't know the current figure, but it used to be $165 million a year in beef exports and a special agreement they had with the European Union. So, it is in fact endemic. And what bothers me about this, Theo, is that my point in all this is that how can they have such an inept response to this? How can they not have vaccine on hand? How can the most industrialized country in Africa not have vaccine manufacturing capacity for this? And then this question I'd like you to address too is that I don't understand why the state has to be the person that does it. The state has shown how inept they are at so many things, maintaining infrastructure, protecting the public. I mean, I have 3 video messages this morning where somebody recorded a South African's home was robbed last night, and they call the emergency number and they hang up on them. 3 times in a row, the police hang up on them because they don't want to answer the phone. And you have 24 hours report a crime or they don't do anything. So how in the world is the state the only actor that's responsible for this when you've said they trust you for brucellosis and other things? I mean, in America, we vaccinate our herds with private veterinarians. That's why we have veterinarians. I mean, if my livestock need treatment, I call the local vet. And if I don't like his service, I call the next one and I get her over here. It's very odd to me. It seems to me that there's complete breakdown in governance here. Am I missing something?
You are putting your finger right on the spot, Chris. You see, by law, foot and mouth disease is a state-controlled disease in South Africa. So we cannot, as farmers or as private veterinarians, decide that we will do it for ourselves. By law, we are not allowed. It puts all the power in the hands of 2 or 3 senior government officials. But they have the power without being held responsible. There's no consequences for not acting when there's an outbreak. Our regulations, which feed into this law, says that the director for veterinarian services must ensure that there is enough vaccines available. It's not being done. As you rightfully ask, why must South Africa import our vaccines from Botswana? Why should Botswana provide vaccines for the whole of Southern Africa, even to us in South Africa? Where did we lose our capacity to produce vaccines? Now, already in 2012, government approved a budget to upgrade and revamp that capacity, R500 million. It is gone. No one knows where it is today. When we got a government of national unity last year, one of the first commitments by Minister John Steenhuisen was that he will find that money. He will chase after it. I don't know what happened since. We never heard about it since. It is now 17 months later. And we still wonder what happened to that money. But the fact is that the money which was supposed to keep us on the cutting edge of combating foot and mouth, that money is gone, and now we have this outbreak and we cannot manufacture it. There is a commitment by the minister that by March next year, we will be in a position to manufacture, but it's around 20,000 doses per month. That will not even treat 1/3 of the feedlot closest to Johannesburg. What to say, a national herd of 14 million cattle.
Well, it's absolutely insane, absolutely insane what we're talking about here. And, it just, I don't know, Theo, it seems to me to be an indicator of a wider collapse in governance that's occurred, particularly over the last 15 years. With the ANC at the helm, and let's not pretend ourselves. The ANC still runs the roost. They still rule the roost. They still run the country with the compliance and the supplicants of the Democratic Alliance, who seems to be the ANC light. This is a party that stood firm as an opposition party against national health insurance, against the Basic Education Laws Amendment Act, against expropriation on compensation, all these things that they oppose in opposition and are largely silent on now that they've become the law, and they just seem to be part of the let's get along and go along crowd. And I'm not here to bash the Democratic Alliance, but what I'm saying is they don't seem to be any force within the government for change and improvement. except maybe in home affairs where Leon Schreiber seems to be doing a pretty good job, but certainly not in agriculture. It seems like agriculture's falling apart and gotten worse since the DA joined the coalition. What am I missing?
Look, I've been involved in organized agriculture over the last 25 years. And of course, the members of our farmers' organizations vote for different parties. A lot of them are supporters of the DA, some of them for other political parties. But what we have in common is we expect the parties whom we've voted for to stick to their policies as it were before the election. So what farmers expect from the Democratic Alliance is to be there where there's a battle against expropriation without compensation. We want to see them in the front trenches in the battle against BEE and employment equity, which is really hurting the farming sector. And they say capital is as shy as a deer. When you scare it, it runs. And we see investors running from our industry because of legislation which was passed very often after the election of last year. So also in agriculture, we do not want to see the new minister who is from the DA, we don't want to see them implementing the previous government's policies in a better way. We want new policies. We want a new approach. We have not really seen that. Yes, now there's a new policy on foot and mouth, where the decision, a very brave decision was made, let's vaccinate the whole herd, without creating the capacity to do so. Not one government official in that department has been fired. Not one has been held accountable for the mess in which we are right now. And that's the difference with the Department of Home Affairs, where Minister Schreiber took the step to fire corrupt officials. We've seen the same with Minister Groenewald in the Department of Correctional Services. Farmers are now stepping forward and demand senior officials, those who wield the power to take decisions on foot and mouth, to be held accountable and responsible.
Well, that's a fair response, Theo. And like I said, it wasn't an effort to bash the DA, and you didn't do that either. You just spoke what your expectations are for people in politics and control. But I mean, I listened to what Minister Steenhuisen says on BizNews and also what he said in public pronouncements, and I can't do the math. I mean, maybe I'm a graduate of Common Core, but if we can import 1 million doses from Botswana per month, and there's 14 million cattle that need to be vaccinated, it's December. We haven't started yet, so let's pretend we start this month, December, January, February. That's 3 million head of cattle, not 14 million. I'm not really sure. Maybe I'm fuzzy on my math there. It sounds to me like it's politicians just saying what they think they need to say to get along and go along rather than actually solve the problem. I don't see a solution here because they're not doing it. Now, I realize that other vaccine manufacturers, foot and mouth, because it's in many parts of the world, the Middle East and all and around Africa, they have different strains of the virus and the vaccines don't have the efficacy sometimes. But I've seen no mention of Morocco. Morocco produces a number of different strains of vaccine. I don't know if they've even reached out to Morocco. I didn't see that mentioned anywhere in the press. But it seems to me that it's just, I don't know, I don't want to say grandstanding, but certainly, you know, it's kind of like what the Foreign Ministry, the Trade Ministry, and the Agriculture Ministry have been telling us for 10 months, that they're negotiating with the Americans. They're talking to them about the tariffs, and they're on the verge of a deal, and they have a team, and none of that was true. Those are all lies. I've exposed those as lies, and it's been proven to be the case that they've been lies. It seems to me that the government officials are just, you know, whistling past the cemetery, Theo.
Again, Chris, you are really scratching on the itchy spot here. You see, there are these different strains, and in South Africa, we have 3 strains which are prevalent. And we must make sure that any vaccine can address these 3 strains. So there's an international reference laboratory for foot and mouth. It is based in the UK. And usually you would send a sample of your strains to that laboratory to make sure that it is paired up with your local strain, that the vaccine is paired up with your local strains. Now, from what we as farmers heard, and let me right at this point say that the communication is absolutely up to nuggets. We don't have nearly the kind of communication which we need to have all the heads turned in the right direction and to make sure that we have a coherent buy-in to a national strategy. But what we heard was that already in June this year, the order was given by the minister that our strains should be sent to this reference laboratory in London, and up to this day it has not been done. When the ministers appointed task team of private veterinarians, and it's really some of the brightest minds in animal health and amongst the scientists in South Africa that we've got on that task team, when they asked about sending our strains to this laboratory, the response they had from government officials was, that is our intellectual property. We will not let our intellectual property slip out of our hands. My God, man, we have a national crisis. We have farmers going bankrupt because of this disease. They're not allowed to sell their cattle now. And the banks and the agribusinesses have no sympathy for them not meeting their financial commitments because they cannot sell their cattle. Instead of creating a financial mechanism to assist these farmers just to breach this time of hardship, the government officials decide that this virus, which they have not created, is our intellectual property, and we will not send it to the UK. But as you say, it is not only Botswana. We can also import from Turkey, but we can also import from Brazil. You know, we only have 14 million cattle. In Brazil, there are 800 million cattle. And they were in even a bigger predicament than we are. But the Brazilians knocked down foot and mouth with a similar project to vaccinate the national herd, and so did the Argentinians. Today, that whole continent is free of foot and mouth. And we just got the prices today. The Brazilians say the average price for a dose is between $1.50 and $2 per dose. We've been paying more than 100 Rand, about 120 Rand. It now came down to 86 Rand, which is what, about $6, $7. You see, farmers suspect middlemen. They suspect tenderpreneurs to be benefiting from this disaster. And therefore, they are asking all these difficult questions. They want, what farmers want, is for the minister to use his power to say, let's force a public-private partnership and let the private veterinarians, the private animal healthcare professionals, and the private scientists take the lead in this thing and add to the capacity which we do not have in government. And let's knock down this problem and put agriculture back onto its feet again. Because we sit with cattle farmers from Cape Town to Messina and from Durban to Port Nolloth. It now impacts on the whole country.
Well, Theo, lots of people like to run with wild conspiracy theories, which I don't really entertain. Bill Gates, the World Economic Forum, George Soros is a grand conspiracy. But I think you've hit on something that's much closer to plausibility, and that's that tenderpreneurs may be involved, and that would explain why the damn vaccines are so expensive. I mean, at 85 Rand a head, that's $70 million to vaccinate the herd. But you just talked about $1 something, so we're talking 14 to 20 million max to vaccinate the entire herd because of the cost of what Brazil's brought it down to. But folks, I do have to say thanks for tuning in. We appreciate you being here. This is a live interview with Theo Jager. Of course, Theo is the executive director of the Southern African Southern African Agri-initiative. I was hard time was getting the AA there at the end. It's my language, English. But I do have to apologize. I know a lot of people have chided me because I've been convening with the spirits and I have a connection to the afterlife. I realize that you don't believe it's Theo Jager because, of course, he was removed from a photograph on a recent trip with the agriculture minister to Berlin, and you think that he doesn't exist anymore as a consequence of that. So I just need to make it clear, Theo is alive and well. This is him. This is not someone calling in. I'm not using mediums and spirits to bring him in. But I know many of you have seen the photograph, and I exposed that photograph because it was made available to me where he was actually in the photograph, and then he suddenly wasn't there anymore. But it's the magic of Photoshop. Theo is alive and well, I can assure you. Theo, I mean, you're not calling in from the afterlife. This isn't a connection to heaven, is it?
I only disappeared from the photo. I'm still around.
So that's kind of I'm not really sure what happened there. We won't really. I don't think we need to get into too much, but it was quite an odd situation. You as a representative of not just farmers in South Africa but across Southern Africa, up there for a big meeting with the Germans. And you're just removed as if you never went. I guess somebody's feelings must have been hurt about something you said or did, but I don't know. But it was kind of strange, to say the least.
Yeah, it happened immediately after we came back, about 2 days after we got back from Berlin. The news broke that our president had signed off on the new Expropriation Act. And my organization, SAI, was the first to react to that. And we were quite alarmed. For us, this was the worst kind of news you could bring to us. This new act would give more than 1,000 institutions, from national government departments to provincial departments to municipal departments, the power to expropriate us without paying us market value. And it might even drop as low as nil. It's very explicit in this new act that we can be expropriated at zero compensation. But also, it would happen before a legal process and not after a legal process like you would have in the USA or in Europe. And when we made alarm about it, we also reminded South Africa that our organization actually originated from one of the first expropriations at less than market-related compensation, the expropriation of the farm Ackerland in the Limpopo, which was expropriated at more or less 20 to 25% of its market value. And then Media 24 published a series of articles in which they denied that Ackerland was ever expropriated, and they confronted Minister Steenhuisen with mine accompanying him to Berlin, asked him, is this guy an advisor to you? And he denied that I'm an advisor to him, which is no problem. I am not an advisor. I'm representing the voice of family farmers, and the interest of family farmers are very often out of step with the interest of the department or the state. So since then, the relationship has been a bit tense. It is not only about that act and the damaging effects of that act that we differ. It is also about the agricultural master plan, where we feel that there's too much focus on transformation in that master plan and too little on profitability. Actually, there's absolutely no mention of the profitability and the sustainability of farms in that master plan. So we also got at loggerheads with one another on the master plan. And after that, we also clashed with the Department of Agriculture on the new regulations for meat analogs. Our country was one of the first in Africa to give meat analogs, that's plant-based alternatives, insect-based alternatives, and lab-grown meat, the right to put the term meat on its labels, and not only meat, even steaks, chops, sausages, quite a long list of meat-related names. And as farmers, we also take care of the interest of soya bean farmers and yellow bean farmers, from which these meat analogs can be made. But we say these bean farmers, they should take pride in putting an excellent bean on the market and not pretend as if it is meat.
Yeah, no, look, the whole fake meat thing, that's a whole other story to get into. I just want to make a comment here very quickly to something in the chat. A gentleman jumped in the chat just a moment ago, and Nosifo Dlamini, Dlamini sounds a lot more like a Swazi name than a Zulu name, but he said, stop calling your conversations Indaba, neither of you is Zulu, and it's highly offensive. To which I say, the government of South Africa is not Zulu either. When they stop calling it a mining Indaba, then I'll consider changing the name and honoring the Zulu word so you can footsec, you rude-ass troll. You're not appreciating this program. Sorry about that, Theo. It's just necessary to deal with this little clown. With the pitiful little, black supremacists and leftist trolls that like to come on here and spew their nonsense. Anyway, so back to the story. So with this situation with the cattle, it's not as simple though as one time, is it? Don't you have to do a booster or a second round of vaccines for foot and mouth, or am I mistaken in that?
On most of the water-based vaccines, like the one manufactured in Botswana, yes, you need to have a second vaccination. So if we would use the Botswana vaccine, which is not registered in South Africa for our use yet, we would not need 14 million, but 28 million doses. If we use the oil-based vaccine, such as the one from Turkey or from Brazil, you only need one shot. We will have to see what the logistics will look like. We are still very much concerned that we have not really seen a plan with dates and places and objectives to it. We really hope that the minister would set up a logistical team from the private sector and involve a few engineers and private veterinarians and farmers leaders in it. Because if we put our minds to it, if we really get the state to play its part, we can knock down this disease in a few months. But then it must be a team effort, not led by a few government officials who have a very poor track record of really achieving objectives.
Well, Theo, in the past, South Africa has been able to manage this, as we talked about early in the program. They've been able to keep this under control. It seems to me that this appears from the outside to be an issue of negligence here, and I'll get you to weigh in a second. But I contrast this with Botswana, where I used to live. Officials in Botswana, a small country with just a little over 2 million population, a country with millions of head of cattle that relies heavily on their exports to the European Union. They seem to be much more proactive and on top of this. And my experience is that when there's been a report of an incidence of foot and mouth disease, Botswana veterinary authorities and agricultural representatives are on the ground almost immediately. I'm puzzled to see how South Africa, an industrial country with 60 plus million people and billions and billions of GDP, almost $500 billion annually, can manage to screw this up so badly. It seems to me that it's either negligence, incompetence, or a combination of the two, or maybe there's something else here I'm missing. I'm not sure.
Well, both Botswana and Namibia get it right. They manage it. And as you say, they can export to the EU. Of course, they are very nervous now, because now they also have to protect their borders with South Africa. I met with a farmer yesterday who told me that he went to visit Namibia, but he drove through Botswana. And at the border post, they confiscated his Kentucky Fried Chicken and threw it in the dustbin. And I said, great, that's what we need to do. You need to protect the integrity. And if you need to throw all the meat products in the dustbin, that's what you do. But I salute them for having the capacity to protect the integrity of those zones the way they do. This is what we do not do in South Africa, and this is why it is running like wildfire at the moment from dairy to dairy in KwaZulu-Natal. And it's not only the dairies, it's the feedlots, it's the auction floors, and it's of course the stud breeders who are really suffering at the moment. The farmers are ready, and the private veterinarians are ready. we will do our part and we will do more. But then, because it is a state-controlled disease, we are not allowed to do until the state gives us the authority to do so.
Well, this is anecdotal, so I mean, we can't take this as scientific evidence. But I'm also puzzled, having traveled all over South Africa, with the exception of Limpopo, which I've barely scratched the surface of Limpopo. But other province I've been into many, many times over the past 30 years. I mean, hundreds of times. I've driven all over. And the prevalence of cattle gates, the foot crossing, whatever you want to call those, where the metal bars come across and there's a break in the road and you have to go through the dip to control this. I mean, that's everywhere in Botswana. I mean, everywhere you go, you can't travel. And it's pretty clear to me that they've developed zones without even seeing a map where they're trying to prevent movement from one place to another, this stuff. I see far fewer of those things in South Africa. I mean, I drive all over the country. Is it just my imagination or is it, I don't know. It appears to be a lot less stringent and controlled than what I see in Botswana.
A high-ranking German official who visited 2 weeks ago in South Africa also drove through Swaziland, Eswatini, and he sent me photographs of exactly that. These dips in the road, and you have to get out, and you have to sanitize your shoes. And that is for foot-and-mouth disease control. Now, I was the chairman of a local farmers organization or a local farmers association in Limpopo for many years. And after that, I served on the board of our district agricultural union. In the district where we have the boundary between the blue zone and the white zone. And during my time there, we had a number of outbreaks. You see, the outbreaks are very often on the border of the Kruger National Park because the buffalo gets out. Now, the buffalo cannot break that Armstrong fence around the park, but elephants can. And because there are too many elephants in the park, if you go through the Kruger Park, the first thing you will notice is how the trees are damaged because there's an overpopulation of elephant. And when there's overpopulation, the bulls tend to break out. And where they break the fence, the buffalo would also cross, and they drink water from the troughs, the same troughs as the communal cattle in Venda and Gazankulu, two traditional areas. And there's where we usually then have the outbreaks. And in the latest Afrikaans agricultural magazine, Landbou Weekblad, there is an article which was written by one of your former colleagues, a colonel in the South African Defence Force. He wrote about how he was deployed in both KZN and in our district in 2000 and 2004. Now look what they did, Chris. They went to get a colonel in the Defence Force, and they put him in charge of getting handles on this disease, knowing that he needs to bring the local municipality on board, the traffic department, along with the police and his colleagues in the Defence Force. And he writes in this article, the most difficult constituency was, of course, to get the farmers on board. But he said he worked through our local farmers association. He was my contact man, or I was his. And we got the farmers to be addressed by him, and he explained to them, this is my command system. This is how we are going to control it. This is how I'm going to call you up to do 3 or 4 hours service at one of these points. And this is what I expect you to do. Why a colonel in the Defence Force? Because he understands command and control. And he brought discipline into the system. And we never had a leakage out of that zone. And this is what we no longer have.
Well, Theo, that's what I was going to say. Unfortunately, you're not going to be able to rely on turning to a colonel in the SANDF this day because the number of people who have that professionalism skill has declined markedly. This is a sad shell of what it once was. Even, as you said, the years you've given, that was under ANC control. ANC was controlling the government at that time, and they had effective ways to do it, even if they had to resort to the Defense Force. But that's all gone. People like to focus on the state capture era, but I would argue the demise of South Africa has accelerated much faster after Jacob Zuma left office and under Cyril Ramaphosa. The Ramaphoria was the biggest scam ever on South Africans perpetrated by the media. Any sucker that fell for that, and I'm sorry, but a lot of you South Africans fell for that nonsense. I didn't. I said South Africa has a chance now if they're serious, and you can see that in my presentation about that. In South Africa back in January 2018, I think it was. But that's available on the internet. But they never took it seriously. The demise of South Africa is it's like South Africa was on a rail track under Zuma where things were slowing down, but then it came to a precipice when they picked Ramaphosa, and now it's just accelerating right down the hill. I mean, that capacity doesn't exist, it seems, anywhere. Obviously, the Ministry of Agriculture either doesn't have the capacity or is unwilling to employ it for whatever reason, and I'm certain that the Defense Force doesn't have it. So, I don't want to be a Debbie Downer here, Theo, but it almost sounds like South Africa is screwed with this outbreak.
Remember these two outbreaks, 2000 and 2004, happened while we still had the commando system. We've abolished that since. So there's this line of discipline and this capacity to call up farmers and reserves, which we no longer had. That was abolished between 2004 and 2006. But apart from that, I told you that this very wise move by John Steenhuisen to change the policy so that we can vaccinate the whole national herd was followed by another wise move from him to set up this task team of private veterinarians and scientists. The fact is that task team approached the department with a strategy, and based on that strategy, a whole number of plans, logistical plans, and plans to roll it out. But not one single recommendation of that task team could make it past the senior officials who by law has the power or was entrusted with the power to control this disease. Our problems have names and surnames and titles in their positions in the department.
Well, Theo, I heard the minister talk about what a vital contribution agriculture makes to South Africa, particularly for its exports, and I don't dispute that. That's a true statement. That's why I'm so crestfallen about the South African government's failure to negotiate with the United States to reduce their tariffs. Unlike Switzerland and Japan and South Korea, the UK, and a host of other countries who sent delegations, we never saw one come here to lower these tariffs. But I'm not questioning it, but given that agriculture plays such a huge part in South Africa's exports, I'm befuddled as to why this isn't front and center in all the media in South Africa, this incompetence, this failure, this refusal to take action. It seems to me like the South African media are completely missing what is probably, other than 27,000 murders and the G20 debacle, other than those stories, it seems to me to be, well, I guess we're all hung up on Mhlanga Commission about the police corruption. Fair enough. But it seems to me beyond that, this would be like one of the biggest stories and should be getting ink almost every day of the week about what a disaster this is before the entire herd is wiped out. I mean, that's probably not going to happen. There's always some that survive. They develop, resistance to it. There's genetic mutations of some kind. My point is that this should be a national scandal, a national story. But it's left to me, an American sitting in Pennsylvania, to talk to you because I don't see the media in South Africa talking to you or your counterpart in the other organization down there, Agri-SA. It seems to me to be a story that's being intentionally neglected. Am I wrong?
Yeah, it does not get the attention, but you would also not have read in any of the English media about the 3 farm murders we had over the last week, hey? You also would not have read about the impact of the new Employment Equity Act on farms, where there is literally no place left for the son of the farmer in his management structure because of the strict racial quotas entrenched in this act. I visited Washington, what was it, 3-4 months ago. You know that I've also made contact with you. I was hoping to have another cup of coffee But then I discovered that you are very far from Washington. Now, when we were there, I was there with Gerard Papenfuss, the chairman of the National Employers Association of South Africa, and also with Corné Mulder, the leader of the Freedom Front Plus, which is part of the Government of National Unity. And in one of our visits to the White House, the officials in the White House said to us, and this came as a complete surprise, they said to us, when we send a message via your embassy in Washington, we don't read that message in the newspapers in South Africa. Even when we communicated this to the official delegation, which was led by the president and which also had a few golfers as part of it, we didn't see this message reach the ears of the general population in South Africa because it was not carried in the media. But this is the message. And can you please convey this message to your fellow countrymen in South Africa? And the message is that the trade relations will not be restored until you have addressed 4 issues. And the first issue is they want the ANC as a political party to publicly turn its back on the singing of kill the farmer, kill the boer. But along with that, they want to see farm crime or rural crime, such as farm attacks and farm murders, to be declared a priority crime, similar to what we've done with rhino poaching and cash in transit robberies. But they went further. They also want to see the Expropriation Act to be in line with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Chapter 17, where expropriation is done at fair and equitable value after a process in a court of law at compensation as determined by a court of law. And then they want American companies, investors, both those who are already here and also future USA investment, to be exempted from any racially discriminatory regulations, BEE, employment equity, and all of those. That is the message. And then when we had dinner with them afterwards, they told us that they don't think this bar has been set very high. They think this can happen within a week or 2. It is not rocket science. But until this day, we have not really seen any movement on those conditions. Now, the government in Washington was very clear on this. And I don't see them budging on it. So, yes, we are suffering as farmers too. We have seen what the tariffs is doing to our wine industry. It made us uncompetitive. Also with nuts. Lately, citrus was exempted, as was a few other products, and we are very grateful for that. But we really expect our government to engage with the government in Washington to say, if you have such problems with these 4 things, yes, let's talk about it. Not even that has happened. Well, I don't know who will engage with the government in Washington because we don't have an ambassador there yet. Our ambassador was sent back. But this is really doing damage to our businesses on farms. Hence, we are trying to put on the pressure on our government to make sure that they sit across the table with their USA counterparts. And although exports to the USA is only 4% of our total agricultural exports, it's an extremely important 4%. This notion that we can find alternative markets, India and China, with more than 1 billion people, it's more than 1 billion poor people. The USA might have only 300 million, but it's 300 people who can afford to buy our products.
So you touched on farm murders. Interesting because an article that came out 2 days ago, so this week on Wednesday, after the weekend, in which three farmers were murdered in South Africa, and I saw those stories. I briefly touched them. I've reported on multiple murders that have been confirmed on farms this past year, 2025, including the father-in-law of one of my friends who was in his late 70s. That's the story near Brits, where they came the first night, poisoned their dogs, so they had no early warning. The next night they came, stole a wheel off the front and back of the bucky so they couldn't escape, and then they came and tortured them for hours on end, and then took a few small items. The police came. He was beaten badly, tortured, tied. He was wheelchair bound because he just had a hip operation, and they tortured him badly. He managed to break free well enough to get her free, and then they finally got help. But he died in hospital a couple of days later from the vicious wounds and assault and torture that he underwent in his late 70s. That was reported as a house robbery. I have the police report, which is fraudulent, and I know for a fact that my video caused quite a stir in the Brits area. The commander himself had to go out and talk to the family after it became public knowledge of this police cover-up. My point here is that when people reflect and say, well, the government statistics don't support this, that's because they're bogus. They're lies. So we have here the Daily Maverick now carrying the water to cover up what's happening on farms. And look, again, to be clear, I'm not saying that white people and their death is any better or worse than any other South African, because I'm one of the few journalists who reports when coloreds and Indians farmers are also attacked and black farmers are attacked and murdered on their farms. I do that. But they try to play this canard of whataboutism. But here, she actually has the audacity. I'm going to read this to you, Theo. She says that figures under the heading murder of farming community and subheading victim linked to farm smallholding show that 2 farmers were murdered over the past 6 months. Now, this is after 3 farmers were murdered over the weekend. Obviously, Karen Dolly from the Daily Maverick is a fake news journalist or a person who's just a lazy journalist. They can't be bothered to even investigate the fact that 3 people were murdered over the weekend on farms. I mean, this is beyond simply trying to dismiss it. This is a cover-up at some point. It's just a cover-up by the media. I'm not even talking about the government. I'm talking about the media here.
Yes. You see, our challenge is that the world doesn't know about it because the English media does not report about it. The other 2 murders this weekend, they were also exceptionally brutal. The one old lady in the late 70s, throat was slit and she was thrown into a pit. And now transpired that she was still alive when they threw her in the pit. She died down there. The other farmer, a very well-known farmer, was beaten to death, and his wife was also beaten up. Now, it's not only white farmers who are being murdered. We had a member. She was a pregnant woman, an Indian farmer, who was equally brutally murdered about a year and a half ago. But the vast majority are white farmers. Now, the most common argument is that these murders on farmers are just an extension of a problem we have with murders in South Africa. And it's true that in certain sectors, such as the gangsters on the Cape Flats, or women and children who die in domestic violence, the numbers are even higher, but not in relation to the total number as represented in the population. A higher percentage of farmers are murdered than the percentage of gangsters or women and children. But that's not our only counter-argument. As farmers, we firmly believe that we can single out farm murders as a special kind of crime for 3 reasons. And the first is, no one calls for the murder on gangsters like they are calling for the murder of farmers. Kill the farmers, kill the Boers. And when it happens, it is not accompanied with the same brutality and torture like you have on farms. As you said, the one in Brits, the victims were tortured for hours on end before they were killed. And then afterwards, you do not have the same applause for it, especially on social media. Just look at Twitter, on X, how many comments there are. We need more of these murders. We need to clear the land so that the land can be taken back. And there's no consequence for people calling for this or applauding it like this. That is not the same as those who are murdered in domestic violence, women and children, or gangsters on the Cape Flats.
Well, those are fair points. And another point here, too, is that South Africa was largely self-sufficient in agriculture. At this rate, at the end of the apartheid era, there were approximately 72,000 commercial farmers in South Africa. I don't have accurate statistics, but my own estimates, based on paying attention to what data is available, is that the number is somewhere around maybe 28,000 to 32,000, if that, left in South Africa. Now, some of that is a consequence of urbanization, of also expanding their communities where farmland has been gobbled up in some cases, and also, people don't want to stand land, so the next generation leaves the land. But a lot of this has to do with unique factors in South Africa, like this sort of terror campaign against farmers. But the number of commercial farmers has dropped dramatically, and the commercial farmers, I remember famously in South Africa's parliament a few years back, one of the ANC parliamentarians says, "Why do we need farmers? We get our food from Pick and Pay and Checkers." The level of stupidity is beyond the pale, you know what I mean?
Oh, yes. You see, we have sisters organizations in the USA, and we often engage with them, such as Farm Bureau, the National Farmers Union, US Farmers and Ranchers, and all of them are fighting the same battle as we are, the battle for the family farmer, because all over the world, big farmers grow bigger and bigger, and smaller farmers are dropping out of the industry. This is the reality of the impact of the economy of scale. But where will it end? With a few companies doing all the farming, and there will be no place left for the typical family farmer. So our crusade inside is to ensure that there's a survival chance for the family farmers of our country and our region. They will only survive if they can remain profitable and sustainable. And unfortunately, it is the younger farmers who opt out these days, because it's hard to raise a family on a farm where you have this kind of safety and security issues. It's also hard to keep your family on a farm if there is the threat of expropriating it with up to nil compensation. Apart from that, it is important for us to maintain our towns. It is not as if people move from farms to cities. In between, there is a small town. And that town is usually where the first steps of processing takes place. That's where the pack house is. That is where the depot is, which takes your stuff to the markets. That's where the abattoir is. And our small towns are really falling over because of mismanagement. Chris, you have traveled through many of our towns where it is impossible to go from this side of the town to the other side through the main street without damaging your tires and potholes. You have seen what the water situation is in our small towns. And it's for no other reason than mismanagement and corruption. Now remember, those are the same officials on municipal level that will have the power, or now has the power, to expropriate our farms at less than market-related value. And this is why we are taking the battle against the Expropriation Act so seriously.
Well, it's a lot more than we've even have time to unpack. You talk about the threat of expropriation and compensation. That means land is worth nothing, because I'm not going to buy a farm if the government's going to take it. I'm not going to buy property and invest money and time into it. And not just that, then a farmer needs to borrow money from a bank to buy new equipment, a new tractor, or more fertilizer, or more seed, or more fencing. The bank's not going to loan you money when you have no collateral if your land is worth nothing. That's pretty frightening stuff. But Theo, as a farmer myself, not these days, but growing up in high school, I was a dairy farmer, about 17 acres, Jersey and Guernsey. The thing about the family farm that resonates with me, that's so important, is that I learned the value of hard work, of thrift, of being responsible. You only have limited resources, and you are at the whim of nature. Now, dairy farmer, I'm not so much affected by the weather as a crop farmer, but nonetheless, it does have an impact because it drives up the cost of my feed. For straw and for bedding and for hay, for consumption, also for grain for the cattle. Those things all get driven up when there's bad weather. So all of that affects it. And I learned the value of hard work. Excuse me. Respect for the land as a consequence of having been a farmer, and I'm a conservationist. I believe in the earth is here for us to use, but we have to renew it. We have to be responsible, not one of these environmental wackos that say no one can live there, keep the humans away. But my point is that so many of the values that are so important to a functioning society, I learned on a farm. I didn't learn it living in a housing tenement, in a government housing, which I did as a kid. I didn't learn it living in a peri-urban setting. I didn't learn it in an urban setting. I learned it on a family farm, and those values translate over. I mean, look at the impact of family farms in America throughout history. It goes beyond just farming and agriculture. It affects music. We have a whole music industry as a consequence of our tie to the land. The loss of the family farm is a loss that the world should be cognizant of and should be paying attention to. And I think in South Africa it's especially important because this is who the many of the modern people who've descended from South Africa's immigrants, whether they be the Nguni speaking people, the Bantu migration, they were farmers, they were cattle farmers. They came down the Great Rift Valley and settled crossing the Zambezi and Limpopo rivers into South Africa. And then the Europeans who came, they were primarily farmers. And so I think if we lose this connection to the land, it's tragic for human society. Any thoughts?
Yes, and I must say, nowhere in the world is that battle lines more clearly drawn than in the USA. And we take a lot of cues in the way the USA farmers organizations are taking up the battle and try to ensure that there's a survival chance for family farmers. You see, a family on a farm is a different kind of structure than a family in the city. We still eat together. We spend a lot of more time together. It's a much closer knit structure. But more than that, the horizon for a farming family is never the end of the next financial year. It's the next generation and the generation after that. It will be a very sad day if the food system drops on primary production level out of the hands of family farmers. I had the opportunity to visit 86 countries when I was the president of the World Farmers Organization, from the Soviet Union or from Russia to Florida. I've been in the Scandinavian countries and in 44 of the countries in Africa. And family farmers understand each other's language. We are facing the same challenges. And the most important job for a farmers organization is to try to influence policies. We are doing advocacy. And we must make sure that governments create the kinds of policies in which we can thrive, in which we can retain our profitability. And although the challenges are the same all over the globe, in South Africa we are faced with special challenges. Nowhere else on the globe do we have this kind of problem with farm murders, farm attacks, singing kill a farmer, kill a boer. Nowhere else do you have this kind of expropriation act where nothing is certain. And you see the impact on investment in our sector. So that's the reason why we are scrumming against our government, also against our government of national unity. We demand policies which will give us a fair chance to remain profitable and remain sustainable as family farmers.
Well,
and Chris, we've just had the G20 in South Africa. We had two debates on agriculture. We had a debate amongst ministers in Somerset West, and the day before that, we had a farmers' dialogue, which was attended by farmers across the globe, mostly digitally, but we had the USA, the Swiss, the Italians in person there. And we addressed these four issues, which we sincerely hope will be at the center of the farmers' debate at next year's G20 in Miami. We discussed the future of family farmers. It is a burning issue for all farmers across the globe. We discussed the impact of artificial intelligence, big data, and digitalization on the way we produce and the way we link up to our markets. Then we discussed trade, global trade, because today that anchors food security. And of course, we had a discussion about livestock and animal-based proteins and the pressure, especially on our colleagues in Europe, where some countries such as the government of the Netherlands already decided that they want to scale down on the national herds and they want to halve their national herd by 2030. This is the reason why farmers took to the streets in Belgium, Netherlands, and in Germany. And we see the same tendencies also elsewhere in the world, even here in Africa. We do not need less animal-based proteins, we need more of it. And yes, we can do better when it comes to genetics and upgrading the production. Instead of having 100 cattle to meet the needs of a village in Ethiopia or Tanzania in terms of milk, we can do the same with 3 cattle if we bring the genetics from the Netherlands into Ethiopia or Tanzania. It is not happening because the policy environment in those countries are not conducive to profitable investment by farmers. We need better policies.
Well, I can't disagree with that. But before we wrap up, you've touched on something. Europe, it's been a major issue in the UK and France and Germany, but also in the Netherlands, where they're trying to just wipe out these herds and eliminate farmers altogether. In the Netherlands, their argument is methane. That's their argument. But, the problem in South Africa, and we've talked about what appears to be either the incompetence or the willful negligence of the Ministry of Agriculture. I'm not sure which it is, or maybe it's a combination of the two. But certainly they're not up to the task. And the proof in the pudding is the fact that foot and mouth disease is all over the country now and not contained. But now we have another concern. I mean, we've talked about the ungulates. We've talked about buffalo and cattle. Now let's talk about another ungulate. Rift Valley fever, an outbreak in the Northern Cape. I mean, with a Ministry of Agriculture that already can't handle the foot and mouth, how long before that gets out of control potentially? And there's even discussions, which I've not seen in the media, of talking to other farmers about a concern about blue tongue disease that's out there now too. I mean, this sounds like a perfect storm of misery for South Africa's farmers because of an inept and incompetent Ministry of Agriculture.
None of this is new, Chris. We've had Rift Valley fever before. We've had blue tongue before. We are also nervous about African swine disease and avian flu. But we know how to combat it. We always had the capacity to do it. What is new is that we are working with a state without capacity. That is what's new now. And for a part of it, farmers can do it for themselves. For a part, we cannot. And this is when it is outlawed. Foot and mouth is a state-controlled disease. We cannot import vaccines for ourselves. We cannot manufacture it for ourselves. Well, we can if we are allowed, but we are not allowed by law. The problem, once again, is on policy level. We picked up Rift Valley fever in the Northern Cape, but we picked it up at a very early stage. And because we have a very competent network of private veterinarians, We engage them on a weekly basis, and we are quite confident that we can contain the Rift Valley fever to that area and that we can knock it down. What we can do it because it is only a disease which by law must be reported to the state. It is not a state-controlled disease, similar to lumpy skin and brucellosis. By law, we need to report it to the state, but then we can do something about it for ourselves. The trouble with foot and mouth is that we are not allowed.
The state has a monopoly on the response to foot and mouth, and we see the state's response, which is inept. And that's, I think, ultimately the bottom line here. But the Minister of Agriculture, John Steenhuisen, blamed farmers for this. And no doubt there may be some blame for some people moving things around, maybe non-traditional farmers or maybe traditional farmers, I'm not sure which. But he seemed to lay the onus of burden on the outbreak spreading entirely on farmers. And, excuse me, I do know some farmers that have cattle in South Africa and Northwest and Gauteng and other places, and who I've spoken to, and they are irate over this allegation because they have bent over backwards to try to comply with these constraints, and the government has not been there. The police aren't there checking. You don't have the dip stations like you have in Botswana. But the Minister of Agriculture is firmly, squarely blamed for the farming community for the foot and mouth outbreak and takes no responsibility for it whatsoever. That's my assessment of what he said on that interview with Biz News with Alec Hogue.
Yes, and the farmers are very angry about that. You see, it's an oversimplification. You say, one, that we can solve this thing by just vaccinating the national herd, and two, that the farmers are to blame because who is moving cattle? It must be the farmers. It must be the owners of the cattle. And as you know, we have around 7.5 million commercial cattle. And then we have 5 to 6 million so-called communal cattle grazing on the shoulders of our national highways and national roads. And it's much harder to vaccinate the communal cattle. Behind that is an identification system. You cannot control cattle if you cannot identify them. And just like with humans, we have two kinds of identification. We have a document, which is an ID or a passport. In the case of cattle, it's an ear tag. But along with that, we have biometrics. We have a fingerprint. Cattle should have a nose print. The technology is available. We just need government to buy into that and to enforce it. And behind that, there is communication. If you do not communicate with your farmers to say, this is how we can solve it, this is what the plan is like, how can you expect them to buy into it? If you don't communicate with farmers, farmers suspect that you do not have a plan, that you have nothing to communicate. And as I said at the beginning, the communication in this foot and mouth outbreak, whether it is from the minister's office, whether it is from the department, the ministry, or whether it is from the organized structures which advise the minister. And in our case, it is the Red Meat Producers Organization or the Red Meat Industry Forum, RMIS. The communication has really been up to scratch. It's actually a wonder that we do not have a bigger problem because of the poor communication.
Well, I just want to turn this on its head a little bit for a second here and discuss something else before we wrap up, and I'll give you a chance to speak a final word after that. And that is that you would think that the government would be more interested in the status of the cattle industry and of cattle in general, given the fact that this disease hits commercial farmers, it hits non-traditional, it hits communal farms because it spreads all over. And, in the context of that, from a cultural standpoint, you would think this is very important to the government of South Africa because lobola is a traditional form of bride wealth cattle. Just traditionally, historically, people paid lobola for bride wealth in the form of cattle. I know some people give cash or things today, but the more the urban dwellers. But the thing in the past, you go to Botswana, for instance, even if you live in Gaborone, you're expected to go back to the cattle stand and you're expected to negotiate that bride wealth in order to gain the hand of that maiden to become your spouse. If foot and mouth disease wipes out herds for that, how are people going to pay bride wealth? You would think, I'm not being sarcastic here, Theo. I'm serious. This is a real cultural issue. Why the government doesn't even address it from that standpoint, you think they'd be more sympathetic to it, since they're always talking about our people, our people, our people. Presumably that includes 43 million black South Africans, many of whom practice traditional concept of lobola and use cattle as bride wealth. Again, I'm not being sarcastic. It's a serious issue in my view. What do you think?
Chris, I found it hard to explain elsewhere in the world what the cultural value of both land and cattle is, because it's not the same in Europe or elsewhere. We have a thing about land as if we were made from the dust of this particular piece of land. And it crosses all cultures. It's so for white farmers, it's so for black farmers, it is so for colored or Indian farmers. We have a thing about land, our origins. But we have this thing for cattle too, our traditional cattle. And you'll see we call it our own names. You have the Afrikaners, you have the Tulis, you have the Ngunis. And we take great pride in these indigenous breeds for much more than just this beautiful tradition of lobola. Lobola is not just paying for your bride. You merge the herds of two families, similar to what you are merging the families now. And it's very hard after a while to untangle that again. It's something very deeply, nearly religiously, of cultural value in that. But it's also slaughtering the cattle at the funeral. It's a beautiful tradition. And when government does not pay the attention it should to protecting our national herd, it's about more than wiping out wealth. There's one farmer who said Monday evening on a television program that he has lost 50 million rand already in this foot-mouth disease. But he can survive it. If you are a smallholder farmer or a communal farmer or a peri-urban farmer, and you have only 5 head of cattle, it wipes out everything you have. This is why it is so important that we approach this disease in a better way than we are doing now. And I'm not criticizing the strategy to vaccinate the whole herd. I only say it's a very hollow expectation that has been created if it does not go with changing the regulations to do it and coming up with a very practical plan of how will we get the vaccines here, how will we distribute it across the country, who will take responsibility to vaccinate and to measure what's been the progress, how will we mark that cattle, and how will we go forward. Farmers expect practical plans so that they can implement it in real life on the farms and in the communal areas.
Well, Theo Jager, I always give my guest a final opportunity to say something. My goodness, that was a powerful statement. But nonetheless, I'm going to give the floor back to you here in just a moment. But I want to thank everyone who's tuned into this broadcast today. And my apologies if you tuned in for the news. But this has been a fascinating and insightful conversation. And we've continued it here as it went past the top of the hour. But I'm going to give Theo a chance to give some final comments in here and his thoughts. And maybe if there's any hope in how we can get this. But maybe the answer is letting qualified veterinarians in the private sector start doing the vaccinations and also look further abroad, maybe Brazil, although the ministers argued against that. But Theo, I want to thank you as well, not just my audience, but be sure to hit that like button, folks. I mean, the likes, the number of chats that you put in the conversation, that drives the algorithm for YouTube, so that if in fact you're in the middle of a live stream. Another thing it drives apparently is when if I rant and scream, then apparently YouTube picks that up and promotes the video. So that's occasionally why I do that. But if you hit the like button and you also participate in the chat, it does drive the algorithm. It brings more people in, more people can hear this story. So Theo Jager, I'm going to turn the floor back to you for any final thoughts you have on this issue or anything in general you'd like to say. And the floor is yours, sir, and then we'll wrap up.
Thank you so much for that, Chris. Thank you also for the real privilege of being able to share a few thoughts on your platform. I want to say three things. The first is that if the solution starts in the space of policies, those policies must be based on science. Even for us as farmers, where we try to influence policies to do advocacy, our own policies must be based in science. And we do not have a problem with that. We have some of the best animal scientists on the continent. We are very proud of that. But they must be given the space to bring the science to the policies. Secondly, these policies must be implemented. And we have a real problem in South Africa with the implementation of policies. If you hear me and other farmers skeptical about the new policy to vaccinate the national herd, it is not because of the principle of vaccinating the herd. Farmers are skeptical about the capacity to implement it. But then whether your viewers are South Africans, my fellow countrymen, whether they are black or white, in my organization, we organize family farmers, and they are not only white, they are not only black, they are across all the races and all the cultures. Or whether your viewers are elsewhere in the world, in the USA, I can assure you, when I meet with farmers, and that happens every week of my life, across the whole country, farmers are hellbound to get this country right again within our lifetime. And we will do what's needed to be done to get it there. And we know we must start in the capacity of the state. That's where we can make real changes over the short term. But that will require very brave political decisions. And we are putting up the pressure on the politicians to make those decisions.
Well, Theo Jager, thank you very much for that. I appreciate that. Anna Kruger says, Theo, je is een eiste für uns. Dankie. So there's a lot of gratitude coming in the chat. Thank you, everybody, for that. Once again, I want to thank you for coming on the program and wish you a good day and hope that this gets under control. And thank you for input and insights on this. And I think that folks will say that this was not a bashing of anybody. I think we were both objective in our comments and analysis of the actors involved. But clearly, the government is not performing the job it's supposed to do. And if it wants to continue to have monopoly on fighting foot and mouth disease, it needs to step up to the plate. Otherwise, it needs to relinquish authority and turn it over to the private sector, which probably could get the job done much quicker and much better. Theo Jager, bye-bye, donkey. It's always a pleasure.
Same. Thank you, Chris.
All right, I'll let you drop off the stream, and I'll go ahead and wrap this up with my final comments. A little programming announcement for my audience. The news, which was scheduled for 11 Eastern Standard Time, which would be 6 p.m. South Africa time, is now going to be at the bottom of the hour. So we'll see you at the bottom of the hour, folks. And that will be the news in about 6 minutes. You'll be redirected to that automatically from here, so please tune into it. Was it Gesende Kersfeest, and also a Merry Christmas for Weihnachten to everyone out there. And thank you to Theo Jager. It was a pleasure to have him on to discuss this very important issue affecting South Africa, which the media seems to have little to no interest in covering. It should be, in my view, a major story for South Africa. But anyway, that's going to be it. See you shortly for the news at the bottom of this hour. And thank you for your patience. If you haven't hit that like button, be sure to do it right now. It doesn't cost you anything but a moment of your time. I mean, it's not hard. It's
That was easy.
so easy to do. Thank you so much for your participation in this program. We'll be back here shortly in just a few minutes. God bless and Merry Christmas.